Observer comes to us from the developers of Layers of Fear, a horror title that tried to replicate the style of the now unavailable PT demo. Layers of Fear received a lot of criticism for its lack of substantial gameplay. In broad terms, the gameplay consisted of walking, opening doors, and having the horror happen at you. And PT did this as well, however PT was only an hour long. Stretching that style of gameplay over 5+ hours isn't particularly engaging, which might be the key word. Observer tries to rectify this problem in two ways. The main gameplay feature here is investigating the crime scenes, which I must admit was surprisingly investing. Upon entering a crime scene, you gain access to the memories of the deceased and actually live out their final moments before death. A fantastic concept, I have to admit, allowing for a variety of potentially terrifying scenarios. Once the actual investigation begins, you have two vision filters, which allow you to analyze electronic objects and organic substances. In addition, each crime scene has clues scattered about the place, so it's up to you to combine these three aspects along with your own intuition to determine the hows and whys of the crime scene. There are also several incidental objects scattered about the place, things which help tell the story of the deceased individual without actually being connected to the crime at hand. It helps the game world feel less manufactured and more dynamic and alive. In truth, the gameplay really only consists of pointing and clicking on objects, and yet still manages to be engaging, which speaks volumes about the depth and detail of these crime scenes. They're interesting, which is the most crucial part. The second main gameplay feature is dialogue. Nothing groundbreaking by any means, the dialogue portion sees you talking to various individuals with different response options to pick from. However, there is a design choice here that makes sense thematically, but not in terms of engaging gameplay. A lot of these conversations happen through communication devices on the doors of certain residents. However, the only thing displayed on the screen is a distorted image of their eye. You never actually see them. Now, I get it, thematically, it's a metaphor for how technology has created a literal barrier between people. There's even a conversation early on that reflects this, with the character anxious to talk more because they've suddenly been cut off from the digital world.
Oh good, it's just that it feels weird to just sit here, alone, with my thoughts. You know, can you talk to me some more? It makes it kind of easier.
So, metaphorically, it works well. Gameplay-wise, however, it's tedious. These conversations can go on for a while, and the longer they do, the quicker it becomes apparent that you are doing nothing and looking at even less. It's not engaging. The metaphor simply does not substitute the gameplay. And on a side note, there's a weird quirk with the dialogue. The conversation I mentioned earlier gives you the option to continue talking, or say that you don't have time for this and move on. Should you continue the conversation, however, once the dialogue options have been exhausted, you have to say that you don't have time for this regardless.
Well, what do you want to talk about?
Yeah.
Sorry, I don't have time for this.
Oversights like this aren't too frequent, but it's weird that they weren't considered. I should mention that Observer's protagonist is played by Rutger Hauer, both in voice and appearance. I won't spoil anything, his performance is low-key and somewhat strange, but as it turns out, appropriately so.
Yeah, wouldn't want me to mess up. Can you see the headlines? Another leech goes berserk.
Rutger Hauer's involvement isn't a particular selling point, though I imagine that, combined with the futuristic setting and story, will attract fans of Blade Runner, as it did me. Overall, Observer is rather hit and miss. It makes a commendable effort to create the feeling of being a tortured detective investigating crime scenes whilst dealing with their own horrors, and is engaging in these instances. The main issue lies with everything else. Too often it's overly tedious and not particularly scary, so much as it is atmospheric. I almost want to recommend it for the concept of living out the victim's final moments and the crime scenes because they are good enough to almost make the tediousness of the rest of the game worth it. I respect it, and I certainly enjoyed parts of it, but I can't outright recommend it.